I married Adrian Blackwood to destroy him from the inside and walk away with $10 million and full ownership of his coastal estate in Maine. That was the deal my mother negotiated before she died, and I intended to collect every penny. Step 1, become a splinter under his skin, so irritating he'd pay anything to remove me. Step 2, make his feral younger brother despise the ground I walked on. Step 3, watch him sign the dissolution papers and vanish into a life of solitude with my money and my land and my absolute freedom. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, and I was executing it with the precision of a surgeon. Until the night I found his private audio journal left open on his study computer, the file titled Session 47. My wife is attempting psychological warfare, and I find it fascinating. Leo Blackwood, Adrian's 17-year-old brother, was my first and most reliable target. The kid was a disaster, a cauldron of adolescent rage who'd been expelled from 3 boarding schools and collected restraining orders like merit badges. Every time Adrian returned from his research facility, Leo would ambush him in the foyer with a litany of my supposed crimes. She changed the Wi-Fi password and won't give it to me until I finish my college application essays, all 6 of them. She took my car keys and told me I can earn them back by volunteering at the Marine Rescue Center for 40 hours. She threw away my entire collection of vintage concert t-shirts and replaced them with button-downs that fit properly. She locked me in the greenhouse and said I couldn't leave until I'd repotted 200 seedlings and identified their Latin names. Adrian would listen to each complaint, set down his briefcase, and run a hand through his perpetually disheveled silver-streaked hair. She sounds relentless. She is, Leo practically howled. Good, Adrian would say simply. Someone in this house needs to be. I stood in the corridor, pressing my knuckles against my mouth to stifle the laughter. My mother had been Adrian's former research partner, before her illness, before the betrayal that shattered their partnership and left her penniless. When the board pushed him to settle the outstanding lawsuit, he agreed to a marriage contract instead. He got my mother's silence and her research notes. I got the estate in Maine and the divorce clause. If he ended the marriage within 2 years, he'd pay me $10 million and sign over the cliffside property that had belonged to my grandmother that belonged to my grandfather. $10 million and a house that couldn't be taken away from me. My mother had trusted the wrong people her entire life, brilliant men who promised her the world and then locked her out of her own discoveries. She died in a rented room with a view of a parking lot. I wasn't going to repeat her mistakes. Souring a marriage is the easiest thing in the world if you're willing to be hated. I decided to become a ghost in his meticulously ordered life, a constant disruption to his precious research and his carefully controlled environment. Our wedding took place in a courthouse with 2 witnesses and a clerk who recognized Adrian from a scientific journal. That evening, I walked into his private laboratory off the main house, pointed at him, and laid down my terms. This house now operates on my schedule. You will eat meals at regular hours, you will not disappear into your work for 18-hour stretches, and you will sleep in an actual bed, not the cot in your office. My father, a man I'd met exactly 4 times, had always said brilliant men need to be admired, never challenged. I intended to challenge Adrian until he couldn't stand the sight of me. He studied me for a long moment, his gray eyes unreadable behind his glasses. "All right," he said quietly. "What's first?" I was momentarily thrown but recovered quickly. I pointed at the small refrigerator where his lab stored chemical samples. "Clear it out. It's now for food. You're going to eat dinner with me and your brother every night at 7. He nodded and began removing vials. I expected argument. I expected condescension. I expected him to treat me like a nuisance and dismiss me from his space. Instead, he labeled each vial carefully and moved them to a secondary cold storage unit in the adjacent room. "Is there anything else?" he asked. I narrowed my eyes. "There will be." Leo was my next target. The kid was brilliant, like his brother, but where Adrian channeled his intelligence into biochemical research, Leo channeled his into elaborate acts of domestic terrorism. When I first arrived, he'd rigged the front door with a bucket of seawater that drenched me in front of the entire household staff. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I simply looked at him, dripping with cold Atlantic water, and said, "You'll have to try much harder than that." His eyes lit up with the promise of war. The real battles began over food. Leo subsisted entirely on energy drinks and packaged ramen. He refused to eat at the dining table, refused to acknowledge mealtimes, and would vanish into the tower room where he played computer games against strangers in different time zones. I dismissed the cook temporarily and announced that all meals would now be prepared in-house by me. Leo appeared in the kitchen doorway the first evening, looking horrified. "You can cook?" I cannot, I admitted, pouring a questionable amount of salt into a pot of soup. But you'll eat it anyway, or you'll go hungry. I'm ordering pizza. The phones have been temporarily disconnected from outside food delivery services. I lied smoothly. They'll be restored when you demonstrate basic nutritional compliance. Leo stared at me with the expression of someone realizing they've been outmaneuvered by a hostile foreign power. You're a dictator. And you're malnourished. Sit down. The soup was borderline inedible. Leo gagged on the first spoonful and looked to Adrian for support. Adrian was eating his own portion methodically, his expression thoughtful. The sodium content is slightly elevated, he observed, but the bone broth base is structurally sound. Leo, eat. They ate the entire pot. The next night I made a fish dish that was simultaneously overcooked and underseasoned. They ate it. I made a pasta casserole that had the consistency of spackle and the flavor of regret. Leo asked for seconds and looked shocked at himself for doing so. Something strange started happening around that dinner table. Adrian would ask about Leo's online coursework. Leo would mumble responses, then eventually start talking about the game he was designing, about a complicated girl he'd met in a marine biology forum, about how he'd started sketching again. Adrian would listen and nod and occasionally look at me with an expression I couldn't parse. Leo began following me around the property. If I walked the cliff path in the morning, he'd appear 50 feet behind me, pretending to examine tide pools. If I worked in the greenhouse, he'd materialize and start aggressively watering plants while complaining about the humidity. One afternoon, I was cataloging my grandmother's old botanical journals in the library when Leo dropped a thick envelope on the desk. "What's this?" I asked without looking up. "My college applications," he mumbled, his arms crossed, his face turned toward the window. "Completed applications. All 8 of them, including the essay about my stupid life." I picked up the envelope and flipped through it. Everything was filled out neatly, signed, and organized with paper clips. "You expect applause?" "You said if I didn't finish my applications, I had the future prospects of a barnacle," Leo said, the words coming out in a rush. "I am not a barnacle." I set the envelope down and reached into the drawer of the desk. I pulled out a small tin of saltwater taffy, my grandmother's favorite, and tossed a piece to him. "Adequate progress," I said gruffly. "You've upgraded to the prospects of a moderately ambitious sea cucumber. Now go wash up. I'm making chowder, and it's probably going to be a war crime." Leo caught the taffy, and a grin broke across his face. "Okay, sister-in-law," he said, and sprinted out of the library. I sat very still and processed the fact that he'd called me that for the first time. "No," I told myself firmly. "Focus on the 10 million. With Leo becoming unreliable, I redoubled my efforts on Adrian. I started invading his meticulously organized research schedule. Adrian Blackwood was one of the most respected biochemists in the country. His work on marine-derived compounds had the potential to revolutionize antibiotic treatments. He was also incapable of basic human maintenance. He'd work for 20 hours straight, forget to eat, forget to sleep, and then stumble into the house looking like a shipwreck survivor. I began showing up at his laboratory at 6 p.m. sharp every evening. "Time's up," I'd announce from the doorway. "You're coming with me." He'd look up from his microscope, blinking like a deep-sea creature exposed to sunlight. "I'm at a critical stage." "Everything is critical with you. Let's go." I dragged him on walks along the cliffs. I made him sit on the terrace and watch the sunset. I forced him to go into town for groceries. One Saturday, I made him accompany me to a farmer's market 40 minutes inland. "You want me to carry the vegetables?" Adrian asked, holding a bundle of kale as if it were an alien artifact. "You have arms? You have hands? Carry." We walked through the market and people stared because Adrian Blackwood was locally famous and he was standing in front of a cheese vendor asking honest questions about aging processes while I loaded his arms with produce. On the drive back, he was quiet for a long time. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask," I said, watching the road. "Why are you doing this?" "I want my $10 million. He shook his head slowly. "No, that's the stated objective, but it's not the mechanism. I'm trying to understand the mechanism." I didn't have an answer for him. That night, I went into his study to borrow a book and found his computer screen still active. His voice journal application was open, the latest entry paused mid-playback. I knew I shouldn't listen. I pressed play anyway. "Her approach is fascinating," Adrian's recorded voice said. "It's a combination of environmental control, dietary enforcement, and scheduled interruption of obsessive work patterns. She's essentially reprogramming the household's rhythms. And the strange part is..." There was a long pause. "The strange part is that it's working." Leo completed his college applications today. He hasn't touched an energy drink in 3 weeks, and I've slept more in the past month than I have in the past 5 years. She claims she's doing this to be unbearable, but the data doesn't support that conclusion. Another pause. I think she's trying to fix us, and she doesn't know how to admit it. I shut the laptop and stood in the dark study with my heart pounding. This was a complication I hadn't anticipated. He wasn't supposed to analyze me like one of his research problems. He was supposed to get fed up and end the marriage. The crisis arrived 3 months into the arrangement. Adrian's research facility was hosting its annual symposium, a gathering of the most prominent minds in marine biotechnology. The event would be held at the estate, with 200 guests including potential investors, academic rivals, and journalists from scientific publications. You don't need to attend, Adrian had told me that morning. The symposium can be intense. I'm the lady of the house, I replied. I'll attend and I'll be perfectly composed. I wore a dress the color of sea glass, paired with my grandmother's pearls. The evening began smoothly. Adrian gave a keynote presentation that received a standing ovation. I circulated among the guests and discovered I actually enjoyed the conversations. They were about science and conservation and the future of antibiotic resistance, not about wealth or status or who was marrying whom. Then I saw my father. He was standing near the bar holding a glass of scotch, wearing an expensive suit that didn't quite fit him anymore. Dr. Marcus Webb, my biological father, a man who'd leveraged my mother's brilliance for his own career and then discarded her when a better opportunity presented itself. He was now a consultant for a pharmaceutical company that had been trying to acquire Adrian's research. He spotted me and made his way across the room. "Colette," he said, smiling with too many teeth, "I was hoping to find you here." "You weren't invited." "I pulled some strings," he gestured vaguely. "I wanted to see my daughter and discuss a business proposition." I kept my face smooth and cold. "I have nothing to discuss with you." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Don't be difficult. This marriage arrangement with Blackwood, it's exactly the opportunity we've been waiting for. You have access to his research, his data, his intellectual property. If you could just pass along some of the early findings." I stared at him. "You want me to steal from my husband and give it to you?" "Not steal, share. There's a difference. And given everything I did for your mother, she would have wanted..." Something in my chest went very still and very cold. "My mother died alone in a rented room because you took her research and sold it to the highest bidder. And now you want me to do the same thing to my husband?" "Your husband? The marriage is a business arrangement. Don't pretend it's anything more." I looked at this man who shared my genetic code and felt nothing but contempt. "You need to leave. Colette, now!" My voice must have carried because suddenly Adrian was beside me, his hand pressed gently against my lower back. "Is there a problem here, Dr. Webb?"
My father's expression shifted instantly into professional deference. "Adrian, no problem at all. I was just catching up with my daughter." "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," Adrian said, his voice pleasant and implacable. "You weren't on the guest list and you're upsetting my wife." My father's mask slipped slightly, showing something ugly underneath. "Your wife is a Webb, whether she admits it or not." "She's a Blackwood," Adrian said quietly, "and security will escort you out now." 2 guards appeared as if conjured, and my father was ushered toward the exit, his face burning with humiliation. I stood frozen, my hands trembling slightly. Adrian turned to me, and I braced myself for the questions, the suspicion, the inevitable realization that I was entangled with people who wanted to steal from him. Instead, he lifted my hand and examined my fingers. "You're shaking." "I'm fine." "You're not fine," he said, and led me away from the crowd, into the quiet of the library. He closed the door, and the sounds of the symposium faded. "Your father approached you about accessing my research." I took a deep breath and made a decision. "Yes, and he wasn't the first, and he won't be the last. Dr. Marcus Webb has been trying to acquire your antibiotic platform for 2 years. He thought I'd be his inside source." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "But you said no." "I said no, and I told him to leave." He studied me with those gray eyes that missed nothing. "You could have leveraged that.
You could have played both sides and walked away with more than $10 million. I could have, I said, my voice sharp. I'm aware of what I could have done. But you didn't.
I looked at him, and for the first time since this arrangement began, I told him the truth. My mother spent her entire life being used by men who saw her brilliance as a resource to be mined. My father used her. Your predecessors at the university used her. Everyone used her, and she never got anything back. I took a shaky breath. I married you for the estate and the money, but I am not going to become the person who steals someone else's life's work. I'm not going to become my father. Adrian stepped closer and placed his hands on my shoulders. Colette, I've known about your father's intentions since before we were married. I blinked. What? I didn't marry you because of the lawsuit settlement, he said quietly. I married you because I'd watched you from a distance for 2 years. You were managing your grandmother's estate alone, fighting off developers who wanted the cliffside land, caring for your mother until the end, and never asking for help from anyone. I went very still. You watched me? I noticed you at a marine conservation hearing 3 years ago. You stood up in front of a room of wealthy developers and told them their proposal was, quote, an ecological obscenity, unquote. I think I fell in love with you right there. I stared at him. The marriage contract? The settlement? The prenuptial agreement? Was designed to give you security and an exit strategy, he finished. I wanted you to feel safe enough to stay, but I wasn't going to trap you. I refused to be another man who takes from you without giving anything back. My carefully constructed emotional walls were crumbling into the sea. You manipulative, brilliant, absolutely insane man! He smiled, the first truly unguarded smile I'd ever seen from him. Is that a yes to staying? I grabbed the front of his perfectly pressed shirt and pulled him down to my level. I'm staying, but I have conditions. Name them. You still have to eat dinner at 7 every night. Later that night, after the guests had departed and Leo had gone to his room, I found Adrian in his study. He was adding an entry to his voice journal, the recording light blinking red on his screen. I cleared my throat, and he looked up. You found my journal. Months ago, I admitted. And you're still here. I'm still here. He stood and walked over to me. Then I should probably tell you what I told the recorder just now. Which is? I've spent my entire career studying complex biological systems, how organisms adapt to hostile environments, how they develop resilience, how they survive. He cupped my face in his hands. You walked into my life like a controlled experiment designed to test every boundary I had, and I've never been more grateful for anyone's presence. I'm not an experiment, Adrian. No, you're the result, he said. The unexpected, beautiful result. The next morning, I woke to find Leo standing in the doorway of the kitchen, holding a piece of paper. What's that? I asked, pouring coffee. My acceptance letter. I turned. The marine biology program at the university accepted him, early admission. He was holding the letter with both hands, like it might dissolve. They accepted you? They accepted me, he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the last word. I set down my coffee and walked over to him. I knew they would. How? He demanded, his eyes suspiciously bright. How could you possibly know that? Because I read your application essay, I said quietly. The one about watching your parents drown and how the ocean became the only thing that made sense to you. It was good, Leo. It was really good.